Hello everyone and welcome back to AustinPlus, where today we are doing another comparison or versus video. Yeah, we're doing that. Where today we are answering the question, or regarding, shall we say, the characters Superman and Homelander. Because on paper, Superman and Homelander are remarkably similar. Both possess incredible strength, they can fly, heat vision, and almost appear to be nearly unstoppable. But beneath these similarities lies a very crucial difference: who they actually choose to be. So when we ask who is the more dangerous character, we're talking about their physical power, the threat they pose to people around them. But the answer is far more complicated than you think. And today we are answering the question, who is more dangerous, Superman or Homelander? Just like who is the bigger villain, we are doing the same thing, but this time we're doing a different criteria and different characters. So without further ado, buckle in and let's get into it. I think if we're gonna do this strategically, comparing their power is step one. In terms of like raw ability, both characters possess immense strength, near invulnerability, super speed, flight, they enhance senses, and devastating heat vision is just some of the raw power that they possess. However, Superman's comic does have a different place in terms of scale, because it allows him to move planets, survive cosmic explosions, and be battle-like, godlike beings. Also, he does have freeze breath, which Homelander does not have. But Homelander is an extraordinarily powerful within his own universe, but compared to Superman, his physical capabilities are significantly more limited. If danger were measured purely by strength, Superman would easily come out on top in that scale. Both of these characters utilize their power in different ways. Homelander does it without restraint, and then Superman does because he is a hero. Now you have to remember, both of one's a villain, one's a hero. Physical strength alone doesn't determine how dangerous someone is. It depends on how willing they are to use it. Superman constantly exercises extraordinary restraint, carefully avoiding unnecessary harm, even when facing it against enemies who threaten entire worlds. However, Homelander operates on a completely different scale. His ego, impulsiveness, and emotional instability make him more than willing to use lethal force over personal insults, public embarrassment, or minor inconveniences. But while Superman limits his power, Homelander embraces his power. So I think in terms of restraint and character, Homelander takes that rank. Now, I think the biggest and the most fascinating part of all this is both of their psychologies and motivations. They are polar opposites, but they're so fascinating in both of their respectable worlds. Now, some people can argue that The Boys does take place in the same universe as DC. For the sake of this conversation, we're saying no. As I said, one of the biggest differences in these two characters is their psychology. Superman is guided by empathy, compassion, and a deep belief that every life has value, but his greatest fear is abusing the trust people place in him, as both Clark Kent and as Superman. But Homelander, meanwhile, is driven largely by insecurity, narcissism, and an overwhelming need for admiration, because his self-worth depends on public validation, criticism, or rejection, and all of these can provoke predictable and often violent reactions, making him far more volatile despite his being less powerful. However, I think as a character, Superman is the idealistic one. Homelander is more of a case of if society took a toll, which brings me into what I'm going to say next. I think Homelander is the more accurate to what we would get if this was a real character, but Superman is the idealistic hero. He was one of the very first comic book heroes, and it was made during, I think, World War II. And there was comics that were like, they could believe in a higher power, and they could go to these comics as a sort of escape during the time. So Superman is your idealistic. Homelander is more the accurate understanding of if society did run into a being of this power. Which, as I said, brings me to how society views them. Both characters are symbols that represent two very different ideas. Superman inspires hope, which is the whole idea of his crest, because people believe he always will protect them, and even at great personal cost, he will do so. While Homelander cultivates the image of a hero while secretly using fear, manipulation, and intimidation to maintain control. I think that's he's such a fascinating character, because he is an asshole, but he portrays himself as the hero. But obviously when he's on that plane, he's like, alright, see you lads, see ya. But it's like a dissociative or like personality. I think his greatest weapon isn't just his superpowers, it's his public perception and how he is humanity's protector. Now, as every season of The Boys goes on, that like understanding and perception of the public does decrease, but it does also allow him to hide dangerous behavior behind carefully managed celebrity and propaganda. I think he's got a lot of power, obviously working for Vought, but he also does want to, it's about self-esteem. He wants to feel good, he wants to actually have like people like, oh, you're my hero and all that. But Superman earned that by being a hero. Homelander acts like one. There's two different things. There's a difference between acting and being. However, in this hypothetical, they both do go bad. Homelander is bad, and there is many interpretations of Superman going bad as well. Discussions about Superman often focus on hypothetical scenarios where he actually abandons his moral completely, as seen in alternate stories like Injustice. But those stories demonstrate that an evil Superman would become one of the greatest threats imaginable because of the immense power that he holds. Homelander, however, already operates without any moral restraints. While he lacks Superman's cosmic abilities, his willingness to kill innocent people makes him constantly and immediately dangerous rather than your hypothetical one. Like, Homelander is, like, in every interpretation, evil, sadistic, and and his willingness to kill, as I said, innocent people makes him a consistent danger. However, there's only so many stories where Superman and other alternate stories or universes that he is actually evil. So you're fighting with potentials and hypotheticals than a character who actually is dangerous. That's why I think this is actually a fascinating comparison, because one has many different types, one just is. If both of them in terms of danger were to go bad, who would humanity fear more is a good interpretation, because if ordinary people lived alongside these characters, the emotional experience would be completely different. Superman gives humanity confidence because his actions consistently prove that his power exists to serve others and not himself. Maybe if you're heating up your coffee with the heat vision. However, Homelander does create fear because no one can actually predict how he will respond to disappointment, criticism, or personal failure. I think if you live under Superman's security, would be good. But if you lived under Homelander, it would mean constantly hoping not to be a target for his next emotional outburst, which I think is a good character building in a show. As a character and as a person, shit. So, who is actually more dangerous? The answer is quite obvious. In a perfect world, it's Homelander. But if it was a case of, I give up in life and I'm going to use my powers however I please, Superman is society's cooked. Yes, it depends on how danger is defined. If danger means the maximum amount of destruction a character could cause, as I said, Superman possesses vastly greater potential due to his overwhelming power. But if danger means the likelihood of actually harming innocent people, Homelander is unquestionably more dangerous because he lacks Superman's moral compass and restraint. One has the greater ability to destroy the world, while the other is far more willing to abuse the power that he actually already has. In terms of raw power, as I said, Superman is in a completely different league to Homelander, but true danger isn't just about strength, it's about character. Superman's greatest power is his self-control, in my opinion. But whilst Homelander's greatest weakness is his absence of it, that's why the less powerful hero ultimately becomes the greater threat. Because most dangerous people, the most dangerous person isn't always the strongest one, it's the one without as much holding. But there you have it. But without further ado, folks, that's the end of today's video. I do hope you all enjoyed it, and if you did, please like and subscribe and comment what you would like to see on this channel. But I hope you have an amazing day as always, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye. Yeah.